All right, ETM Hotep, which is welcome in peace. This is your brother Wujao Meneberi Ma'at, and welcome to the Seshu channel. Today is Friday, July 5th, a day after 4th of July, Independence Day. If you celebrate it yourself or not, I'm sure that you definitely heard all the good fireworks going on yesterday. May have sounded like a war zone in your area or not. But again, peace and welcome to the channel. Today, I'm going to be as concise and brief as I can. This live is for the purpose of going over a specific section within the tomb of Rameses III. And this particular section of the tomb has been a section of a bit of controversy in different circles of people on social media and things. Specifically, the section that deals with the Book of Gates, in particular, the fifth hour of the Book of Gates, where what people commonly refer to as the four races of mankind or four races of men are illustrated. And so that has stirred a lot of controversy over a few decades, really, on social media and in debating circles. All right. So the purpose is to shed some light and to orientate people about the illustrations within the tomb. And also it was a in demand or highly requested for me to do this because people are unfamiliar with the illustrations. Some people have been unfamiliar with the controversy itself. And then some people are confused when they're looking for pictures of this particular part of the tomb. So I had promised to go over this and to share the pictures that I have, once again, but do this in a very concise and brief way. And hopefully the way I'm doing it now, it may help people out more than my previous attempts of doing this. This has probably been my fifth or sixth, maybe even seventh time discussing this same issue within the same tomb. But hopefully this time and this go around, I can do a better job. All right. So with that being said, would like to actually officially start the live, and after these words from Dr. John Henry Clark, and we'll be right back.
This is the irony of it all, and this is the trap. The Europeans began to manipulate history when they rose and began to expand into the broader world in the 15th and the 16th century because they had to justify the slave trade and they had to justify the colonial system that followed. And modern racism has its incubation in that period. You cannot enslave a man and say he's a human being, but he has humanity. Black people have never written any definitions of race, any definitions of what a people. They have never said that these people with these kind of traits belong here. Because modern racism had its development in the pseudo-scientific development of intellectual Europe after the 15th century. And they began to say that certain kind of people belong to certain kind of race, and they created the concept of race and racism itself.
You saying, in essence, that there's no such thing as a race?
Oh, I maintain that race is the phoniest issue ever invented by the mind of man. European invented it, developed the concept of race. There's really no such thing thing as a race because nature created no races. Race is a man-made thing.
Could we say that being called black was a political term?
It's a political term and a term which indicates our self-awareness at this juncture in history, and I think we really need it. We need to really bathe in blackness for a while, but I wish we'd get the bath over with and go on to something a little more important. We need to really bathe in blackness for a while, but I wish we'd get the bath over with and go on to something a little more important. Black in itself is not an ethnic term. Black tells you how you look, but it don't tell you who you are. We are essentially an African people. Wherever we live on this earth, we're essentially an African people. And we relate to the millions of African people throughout the world, including the uncounted millions of Africans in Asia. The word Afro-American or African-American would probably be more appropriate and more honest and more in keeping with what we actually are. Because all of us are not positively, physically, real jet black. And so the argument now sometimes is between the supernationalists and the mild nationalists and blacker than thou. When blackness is a state of mind, a state of attitude, a state of approach to things that can exist in almost any of us, including from the blonde black person to the jet black. And the jet black can be traitors, and they can be patriarchs, they can be a whole lot of it. See, we've been everything in history from saint to buffoon. We are complete people, and we need to start looking at ourselves as a complete people. And I think that once we convinced ourselves that we're black and beautiful, we'll stop saying it and just go ahead and be black and beautiful and release a whole lot of energy for more important things.
Could we say that being called black was a political term?
It's a political term and a term which indicates our self-awareness at this juncture in history, and I think we really need it. We need to really bathe in blackness for a while, but I wish we'd get the bath over with and go on to something a little more important.
All right. Once again, welcome to the Sesh channel. This is your brother Medew, Medew, and as I said before, today's live stream is strictly focused on clarifying the 16 figures in the 5th hour of the Book of Gates within the tomb of Rameses III. All right. This particular section of the tomb, and in this particular tomb, these 16 figures have stirred much controversy over the years. A lot of people have been talking about it. It's caused confusion. It's caused arguments and things like that. So we've gone over this many times in the past, but today my hope is to do a better job and to make it more concise and brief as I can, to clarify and to properly orientate everyone with the different illustrations or these figures within the tomb. All right, so make sure you share the video. It's going to be in the archives once it's up. Make sure that anytime this particular subject comes up, make sure you share the video, post the links and things like that. So again, I appreciate anyone who's tuned in live while I go over and discuss this. All right. So to keep it brief, I'm going to dive straight on in. So again, we're in the tomb of Rameses III. And just very briefly, Rameses III is one of the Ramesside kings of ancient Egypt, and his time frame would put him in the 20th dynasty. All right, just to give you a brief where we are, to position us in the timeline. All right, so we're within the tomb of Rameses III, but before I actually show any pictures, let's first discuss what exactly is the Book of Gates. For some of you, this may be the first time you hearing about this, and for others, you may be familiar. This will be a review for you. But what is the Book of Gates? Now, the actual book, the text itself, is not explicitly named by the ancient Egyptians, but as the contemporary name implies. And by the way, the name that we use today, which is the Book of Gates, was so named by an Egyptologist, Maspero, and he named it and So it's stuck, and this is what we call it today. But now, as the contemporary name implies, the Book of Gates is a funerary text that describes the journey of the sun, and by association, the journey of the deceased soul through the underworld or the duat, and its passage through a series of gates that are guarded by various deities. It is divided into 12 sections corresponding to the 12 hours of the night, and each section describes a different gate and the challenges that the soul must face and pass through. Okay, so that's a brief summary of what the Book of Gates is about. Now, a similar text called, most people may be familiar with, called the Amduat. That's the name that most people know it by, but it's really the Emi Duat, which is that which is in the underworld. And that's another text that some people confuse with this one. Okay, so I just want to make sure that you understand that those are two different texts. All right, they're similar because they're broken up, they're divided into hours or by 12, but they're different texts. All right. Now, moving on, the question is, where can we find the Book of Gates? So the Book of Gates has been found in most royal tombs of the New Kingdom in the 18th dynasty in the post-Amarna period, in part together or with or in place of the Amduat. That's what I spoke of earlier, the Emiduat. In the tombs of Horemheb and Ramses I, the Book of Gates replaces the Amduat. However, only a section of the scenes from the Book of Gates are depicted on the walls of Ramses I burial chamber. In the tomb of Seti I, there are individual night hours from the first part of the book on the walls of the two large pillared halls, with the burial chamber again being decorated with the Amduat. A complete and sequentially arranged copy of the book is mounted on the alabaster sarcophagus of Seti I. In the tomb of Ramses II, the Book of Gates is divided between the upper and lower pillar halls. His successor, Merneptah, decorates the upper pillared hall with excerpts from the Book of Gates, while a complete version of the book is affixed to the inside and outside walls of his sarcophagus. Okay. In the entrance corridor of the Osarion in Abju or Abydos, the king or pharaoh had the Book of Gates placed on the right and the Book of the Caves on the left in complete copies, some in sunk relief and some in painting. In the tomb of Seti II, the Book of Gates, which is mainly executed in painted relief, can be found in the first and only pillared hall. Only a few fragments of the Book of Gates on alabaster have survived from the tomb of Sipata. In the tomb of Tarseret, which was later usurped by Setnach, the sarcophagus hall is decorated with the Book of Gates. Okay, so I put in bold the different kings and their associated tombs where you can find this particular text so far. Now, to continue, in the tomb of Ramses III, and by the way, these are in pretty much in order, chronological order. In the tomb of Ramses III, the Book of Gates selection is divided between the upper pillared hall and the lower sarcophagus hall, while his sarcophagus is additionally adorned with excerpts from the Amduat and some scenes from the Book of the Earth. The sarcophagus hall of his successor, Ramses, and we're going to be dealing with Ramses III, by the way. The sarcophagus hall of his successor, Ramses IV, is entirely dedicated to the Book of Gates. The full version of the text is found in the upper part of the tomb of Ramses VI. As in the Osarion, a complete version of the Book of Gates is attached opposite the Book of the Amduat. It's supposed to be the Amduat, whereby the two halves are reversed compared to the Osarion, while the left wall represents the Book of Gates and the right side deals with the Book of the Amduat. Just so you'll know. As the last king or pharaoh, Ramses VII follows the example of Ramses VI by having parts of the book displayed in the only corridor on the left wall and opposite the cave book. After that, the Book of the Gates disappears from the royal tombs. Its echo remains in the tomb of Ramses IX, preserved as an image of depicted doors with centennial snakes. Only once was the Book of Gates found in a private grave outside of the royal cult. The third Amun priest, Nefer, under Ramses III, had a selection of scenes from different hours of the Book of Gates depicted in his tomb. And lastly, after the New Kingdom, the Book of Gates can be found in the book and coffin paintings of the 21st dynasty, although only individual scenes, mainly the final picture, are singled out, such as in the papyri of the Amun singer Anhai, probably still in the 20th dynasty, and in the mythological papyrus of Consumes, which is found in Paris. In the 26th dynasty, the Book of Gates appears together with the other books of the underworld in a wall decoration of the tomb of Petamenhotep, and in the tomb of Mutirdus and Horira in Saqqara. On a later sarcophagi, the first hour and the scene with the court of justice, as well as the 21st scene, meet. And those are different references where you can find it. All right. So now, that was just an explanation of where the Book of Gates and its frequency, where it could be found and its frequency of it being found. Now, to dive in a little further, this is a screenshot, an image of page 66 from Dr. Shekanta Diop's publication entitled Civilization or Barbarism. Again, this is page 66. And in this particular page, he is giving an illustration. He reproduced or utilized an illustration from Carl Lepsius. This particular one in Diop's book is in black and white, and it's figure number 17. And so he labels four figures that are taken from the fifth hour of the Book of Gates within the tomb of Ramses III. Okay, so remember, we're dealing at all times with the tomb of Ramses III, even though the text is located in all the tombs that I mentioned previously. So now within the tomb, there are 16 figures that are supposed to represent 4 categories of men or mankind. All right, so it's 4 by 4, 16. And so what this image reflects is taking one image from each of the 4 groups. And so in this particular publication by Diop, he labels them A, B, C, and D, and then he has the particular notes or descriptions of them. So A, Diop has the Egyptian seen by himself, black type. B, he has the Indo-European. C, he has the other blacks of Africa. And then D, he has the Semite. And then he gives his reference where this particular picture came from. Carl Lepsius, Dinkmeiler, and it's figure 48 within that publication. All right. And let's just read what he has as underneath the caption. He says, this painting, move this out the way. This painting from the tomb of Ramses III shows that the Egyptians perceived themselves as blacks and represented themselves as such without possible confusion with the Indo-Europeans or the Semites. This is a representation of the races in minute detail, which guarantees the realism of the colors. Throughout the entire history, the Egyptians never dreamed of representing themselves by types B or D. Okay, he's talking about B or D. So this text in this book and these statements is part of the controversy that has been created surrounding this this particular tomb and this rendition of the Book of Gates. All right. So here's an actual the page out of Carl Lepsius Denkmaler from which Diop had utilized this bottom portion here. Okay, so this is the color version of it as it is found in Lepsius' work. Okay, so just giving you an idea of how it looks in color. And so now this bottom portion here is from the tomb of Ramses III. Again, this is one figure from each of the 4 groups. There's 16 figures in all. This top section here, this part, is the exact same text, but as illustrated in the tomb of Merni Ptah. All right. So you can see 4 figures, one representing each of the 4 groups. And in Merni Ptah's tomb, there's also 16 figures. And this is one of each. All right. Now, in between these figures, you will see their labels. The first label reads Remech. The second label reads Amu. The third label reads Nehisiu. And the last label reads Chemehu. All right. Now, one thing I would like to emphasize and remind everyone of is when you see Egyptian artwork that's accompanied by text, or when you see Egyptian text that's accompanied by artwork, we have to keep in mind, we must realize that the pictures and artwork that are commonly referred to as vignettes, they are illustrations that coincide or complement the text. Okay, so with that combination of text and illustrations, the text is the primary important ingredient. Okay, it's really no different than what we do today. If you were to write a book explaining anything or sharing information, and you have paragraphs of text, but then you may tell the reader, go see figure 1. And in figure 1 may be a drawing of something, or maybe an illustration, or even a chart or a table with some numbers, or whatever the case is. You're drawing people's attention to something. But what you're drawing them to is you're directing them to from your text. So the text is the primary of primary importance and focus, and the illustrations complement that. Okay, so always remember that. Now, with that understanding, the Book of Gates is a specific text that obviously has certain content, and within the content in this particular portion, which is the 5th hour of the Book of Gates, in this particular section where you see the 16 figures, those 16 figures correspond to the portion of the text where you have the deity Heru is standing with these 16 figures, and he is speaking to them. And the text that he's speaking to them, as a matter of fact, let me just read a particular translation in English of that specific text that involves these 16 figures. So let me just get to that and read that briefly. So here's a translation of the particular text that involves the 16 figures, and this deals with again the 5th hour of the Book of Gates, and this is the gate of Tekaher, okay, which is the 5th division of the Duat. And so it reads, Heru or Horus says to the cattle of Ra, who dwell in the underworld, Kemet and Desheret, transfiguration to you, cattle of Ra, which came into being through the Great One who is in heaven. Breath for your noses, loosening for your mummy wrappings. You are the tears of my brilliant eye in your name of Remech. And I do need to bold these names. Great is the water of him who created you, say in your name, Amu. For them, Sekhmet came into existence. She protects or avenge or delivers their ba, or their souls. You are these against whom I struck. I am content with the millions who came forth from me in your name, Nehisi. They came into existence for Horus. He protects, delivers, or avenges their ba or soul. I searched for my eye when you came into existence in your name, Chimehu. For them, Sekhmet came into existence. She protects, avenges, or delivers their ba or souls. Okay, so this is just a small portion of the section relevant and related to the 16 figures. But notice the bolded words that I bolded. These are the labels of the 16 figures, and they're 4 by 4. So there's 4 of each. So there's 4 Remech, there are 4 Amu, there are 4 Nehisi, and there are 4 Chimehu. Now, what I want to emphasize is that is the order in which these names are mentioned. The order never changes. The Remech are always first. The Amu are always second. The Nehisi are always third. And the Chimehu are always last. Now, the reason for that, or to even further confirm this particular order, is that the ancient Egyptians, aka the Remech, they envisioned their world with them in the middle, in the center. Just pretty much like every other group of people around the world, how they see themselves. They see themselves as, pretty much the best of the best. So the ancient Egyptians, aka the Remech, they saw themselves as in the middle. Now, each of the other 3 represent the 3 cardinal points surrounding the ancient Egyptians. And they start where the sun rises, which is in the east. And so the Amu represents the east. Those are all the Asians that we call Asians today. Then as the sun traverses through the sky, it shines on the south. And the south is represented by the Nehisi, or the Nehisiu. All right. This is everyone south of ancient Egypt's border. Everyone. Then as the sun further journeys and starts to set in the west, it shines on the Chimehu in the west. So the Chimehu represents the west. And those would be what we would call today Libyans. Okay, so you have ancient Egyptians are always first in the center. Then the eastern representatives are the Asians, or Amu. Then the southern or south representatives, the Nehisi, or people refer to as Nubians. And then you have the west representatives by the Chimehu, aka Libyans. All right. Now remember, this order never changes. All right. This is how the book is written. The text is actually written. All right. So keep that in mind. And so now, going back to this image, you will see these labels. So again, the Remech first, the Amu second, the Nehisi third, and the Chimehu fourth. And the same thing in all of the tombs. This is just an illustration of Merneptah's tomb. You see the same thing. This scribbly line means that this portion is damaged in the actual tomb. But this would otherwise be Remech. This would be Amu. This would be Nehisiu. And this one would be Chimehu. Okay? That's the tomb of Ptah. So now let's go inside the tomb of Ramses III. So I'm going to be sharing pictures of the tomb. And for some of you, you probably may have never seen these pictures before. And then others, you have. This will be a review. All right. But make sure you just spread the word. Now, first, what I would like to do is give you a kind of like a floor plan of this particular tomb. Now, what you see on the screen here is only one very, very small section of the entire tomb. The tomb is a beautiful tomb, and it's long. And I believe, and somebody may be able to correct me if I'm wrong, that it's the longest tomb in ancient Egypt. This particular tomb, Ramses III. It was originally constructed for someone else. Then it got repurposed for Ramses III, okay, and extended. All right, it was extended, but that's another conversation. But this tomb is very, very elaborate. It's beautiful. It's a very elaborate and beautifully laid out tomb. So what you're seeing on the screen is only one section, and the scholars have labeled this section as chamber F, as in Frank. Okay, or AKA the pillar chamber, because, and I'm going to use my arrow. I'll use a different arrow. Well, I'll use the same arrow. You see these different, these squares right here represent pillars. So imagine this being an overhead shot looking down inside this particular chamber. So where my arrow was right here, where the arrow is now, this is the entrance to this particular chamber. So you're walking this way. And while you're walking in this direction, you're descending. So it's a slope going downward. Okay, going down into the earth. All right. It's not a steep slope, but it's definitely a slope that you're walking down. So imagine you going down steps. All right. But this is direction. So when you reach this portion of the tomb, and by the way, there's a lot of tomb that you have already passed by the time you get here. Okay. So by the time you come to this entrance here, you're coming in here, you're going to see 4 pillars, 2 on your left and 2 on your right. And then in front of you, you're going to see a big wall, like a mural carving in front of you. But mind you, the tomb, the steps go downward. So this mural here, if you were to keep walking forward, is going to be above your head on the wall. And I'm going to show a picture of it in a moment. Okay, but I'm just trying to give you all a sense of orientation. So that's where you are. Now, on the left-hand side, if you're walking in here and you're here facing how my arrow is, to your left is going to be the Book of Gates, the 5th hour. Okay, that's in the color pink. And it extends on this particular wall. Then there's a 90-degree angle or corner, and it's all along this wall. And then there's another 90-degree angle, and it's all along this wall. Okay, so where you see pink is the 5th hour of the Book of Gates. Now, on these walls are divided by 3 registers, or for lack of a better word, 3 rows of text and illustrations. All right, along this pink color. To your right is going to be the 6th hour of the Book of Gates, which is indicated by the color green. That's going to be the 6th hour of the Book of Gates. We're not going to focus on that today, but that's the 6th hour. And then further in is the 7th hour of the Book of Gates, indicated by the color blue. So just to give you all an orientation of where you are. Now, on these pillars are huge carvings of deities and the king, Ramses III himself. So on this side is Ramses, this side is Ramses, this side is Ra, Harakti, this side is Ptah, etc. So you can, if you need to take a screenshot of this, you can see where the deities and Ramses himself is placed within the tomb. Okay? So Now I'm going to share pictures of entering the tomb. So remember the orientation. You're walking in. So this first picture I'm sharing is just that view that I just did my best to try to describe. Let me just grab my arrow and bring it over here to the next one. So as you can see my arrow here, if you're walking down, like remember I said you're descending downward, and if you were to keep on walking, this is the mural I was talking about. It's above your head. Okay. And here are the 4 pillars. You have the pillar number 1, pillar number 2, pillar 3, pillar 4. And you see Ptah here. You'll see part of Rameses the third here, etc. On the mural, you'll see Rameses giving an offering of Ma'at to Wasir, aka Osiris, on both sides. Okay, it's like a mirror reflection. Not quite, because here you see him. He has the Desheret red crown, and here you have the Nemes crown here. But in both instances, he's offering Ma'at to Wasir. All right. So this is where we are in the tomb. Now remember, the Book of Gates, 5th hour, is going to be over here to our left. All right. So now here is a picture of that mural that will be above your head. That's a close-up. It's a close-up shot. Okay. So maybe we can come later to have a later show, and we can do some transliterations and translations here. Maybe a fun exercise. All right. But that's that image. Now, this particular picture, all I did was take the previous picture, which is this one here, and I rotated it 90 degrees as if you were to look to your left. So now the Book of Gates, the 5th hour, is in front of you. So you would enter here, and now you look to your left this way. So now we are looking this way, in this direction. So you see 2 pillars here, and then you're looking at the Book of Gates. Now I did this way because, as you can see, if you're walking in and walking down, the start of this section of the Book of Gates starts right here at this corner. But you have to walk in and pretty much turn around to see it. You can't just look to you look to your left, but you got to kind of look behind you. Okay? And so it starts here, and it reads this way. Starts here, goes this way, then it goes down the wall, and it ends down here. Okay? So this is the beginning of it. Now the 16 figures that's the main topic of this discussion are found along this wall. 4 of them are found along this wall, and then the other 12 are along the longer wall right here. Okay. Now remember, keep in mind what I said about the order. The order of the figures never change. The names, the labels. Remember, number 1 would be the Remech, aka the ancient Egyptians themselves. Number 2 would be the Asiatics, which would be the Amu. Number 3 is always the Nehisiu, aka the Nubians. And number 4 are always the Chemehu, aka Libyans. And there's 4 sets of 4, each one of those. All right. So now you walk into the tomb and you turn around to face this wall right here. And this is what you will see. This image right here. All right. So let me get my cursor here. So as you can see, this is the pillar, that first pillar of Ptah. And you look on that wall, you see the first 4 figures. Okay, you see those first 4 figures right there? Now right here, this part is damaged. You look beyond the wooden banister, but on the other side of this wooden banister, this part of the wall is damaged. What would normally be here, or what was here, was the deity Heru, or aka Horus, was standing right here. All right, leaning on a staff. And so then you have the 4 figures. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So those are the 4 figures that you would see. So hopefully everybody follows. Now you do see the first figure of the next set of 4 right there where my arrow is, which will be on the adjacent wall. That's after you turn that corner. You see this is the corner right here. All right. But we're still focused on this first set. So let's look at a close-up picture of the first 4 set. So here is those same 4. Let me grab my arrow from here and bring it over here. So now we're looking at a close-up shot of those 4. Now the first of the 4 is slightly cut off, cropped out of the photo. That's right here. You see, and again, let me go back just to show you, just to explain. This is protective glass. Like you see this tan pole right here that's beside the wooden banister, and the tan pole right here, and the tan pole right here. These are frames for protective glass that they did to protect it so people won't, tourists won't come in and mess with the wall and things like that. Okay, spill something or whatever, vandalize. Okay, so that's what you're seeing there, and sometimes they will get in the way in these photographs. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. So looking back at this particular photo, that's what you're seeing, this tan pole right here and this tan pole right here. I'm just pointing those out for you. So on the other side of this tan pole would be the first figure of the 4. So you have 1, then you have 2, then you have 3, then you have 4. Now, keep in mind, these 4 figures are labeled Remech. You see the name spelled out in between them. You have the open mouth, tethering rope, seated man, and the seated woman. Normally be a seated woman, and then the 3 strokes here. This spells the word Remech. Okay, aka Egyptians. That's the label that the ancient Egyptians used for themselves. All right. Now, but notice the figures here. And we're going to come back to the figures and why there's so much controversy about this. But as you can see, you see the first figure of the next set of 4. For now, I'm just orientating everyone with the tomb and where these figures are. Okay. And one of the benefits of me doing this is because quite a few people did not know or did not believe that they're all 16 figures are within this tomb and where they are. You had a few people that I'm familiar with that did not believe that 8 out of the 16 figures are identical. Okay, because in every other place they're never identical. In terms of the 4 sets, they're never an instance where 2 sets of the 16 are identical. This is the only tomb that this has happened in, and we're going to come back to that. So to keep going along the wall, so right now we're just walking around the tomb, just orientating with the wall. All right. So going to the next one. So now, need my arrow. So now you see the 4 figures down here. 1, 2, 3, and then the 4th one will be on the other side of this tan pole. And Heru would have been right here, but as you can see, it's damaged where my arrow is at the bottom. And you still see the word Remech. You see the open mouth, tethering rope, etc. But now we can focus on the next set of 4. So this 4, you see the glyphs in between those 4. This label is the label of Amu. Remember, the Amu are always second. Amu. But here are the figures. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. And you can also see the next set of 4, which are labeled Nehisi. So the glyphs in between these 4 are the Nehisiu. And you see those 4 here. 1, 2, 3, 4. These 4 figures are identical to the first 4 figures that I showed you. 1, 2, 3, 4. Making it 8 in total that look alike. Okay? And I'm saying it for those who did not believe or understand that 8 of them look alike. Okay? So if you know anyone that is of that belief, make sure you give them a link to this video. All right? So those 4 and this set of 4 look alike in terms of the figures, but they're labeled differently. The first set is labeled Rameses, and the third set is labeled Nehisiu, as they should be, because the text, as I said, has a fixed order. The Egyptians always first, or the Rameses, the Amu, Asians second, Nehisi, Nubians are third, Chemehu, Libyans are always last. Okay? So right now we have covered 12. So we have 4, 8, another 4 makes 12. But let's keep going around the tomb. So now we have a close up of the 4 after the first set of 4. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can see 3 of the next set, which will be the Nehisiu. Okay, so we're still on that longer wall, but we're showing a close up of the 4 that's after that corner. The corner would be right here, slightly outside of this picture. All right, so that this would and you can see the glyphs better now. You can see the throw stick, the owl, and the quail chick, and the triple stroke glyph spells the word Amu, Asians. All right, and you can see the Neh bird. You can see the twisted flax here, and you can see the folded cloth, but it's a bit of damage there, and then you can't see the other glyph because it's cut off. But this spells Nehisiu, and so you see 3 of those figures there. So these 3 figures look just like and are identical to the first set over here that's now outside of the picture. All right, so remember that. Let's keep going. Keep going down the wall. So now we're going further down the wall. Here are those figures that are labeled Amu, and we see again. Now we see the 4 Nehisiu, 4 figures labeled Nehisiu. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we start to see the last set of 4 right here, and you see the first one would be behind this tan pole, so you can't see it, but you see the other 3, 1, 2, and 3. So all 4 would be right here. So now we have set our eyes on all 16 figures so far. All right, but let's keep going around the tomb. So here's another angle where you can see the 4 figures that's labeled Nehisiu, and you see 2 of the previous set, which are labeled the Amu. Here's where that first figure of the Chemehu, of those labeled Chemehu right here, but it's damaged. But you see his head right here, right where my arrow is, right at the tip of my arrow is right where the head is. But you can't, it's pretty further away. So let's keep going around the tomb. So here's another shot. And you could probably see it better, that the head, the body is missing because the damage. And then you see the other 3 figures. And these figures are labeled Chemehu. So you have 1, body's damaged, 2, 3, 4. And then the text goes on. So you see the tail of a snake, etc. So this is where the 16 figures end. All right, here's that pillar with Ptah again. And then you have Jehudi, pillar with Jehudi right here. All right. But let's keep going around the tomb. Let's get a close-up on that. So here's a close-up of the last two figures of the figures that are labeled Chimehu at the end. This figure here is not part of the 16. This is one of the figures that's holding the tail of the snake. If I go back to the other one, you see the figure right here. He's holding the tail. Okay, so that's this figure represents that. But here's the last one of those labeled Chimehu, next to last, and then you keep going backwards and you'll see 4. So that's where we are. And maybe let's see this image here. So here's another shot of the last two, and you see the snake, the tail of the snake, and that figure, these figures that are holding that snake. All right, and then finally this particular image, and so I'm just going to pan it. So now we can kind of now that hopefully everyone who's been paying attention is now orientated with all of the figures. Now I'm just going to pan this particular picture, panoramic picture, so you can kind of see it all. So let me put my cursor here. Again, these figures are not involved in the 16 figures in question. These figures are holding the snake for a different reason that the text says so above their heads, but that's for another discussion. But so you see the end of the 16 figures, you see 2 figures here, 2 of them right here. And so what label is always the last label? It'd be the Chimehu, aka the Libyans. That's the label. Remember, the text is always the same. It's fixed. Okay, so those are the 2 figures there. But let me just scroll. So as I go across, now you see 3. You see 3 of the figures. And I'm going to keep on going. Now you see 4. But as I said, the body is damaged. But you can see his head. So the head. So those are all 4 figures that are labeled the Chimehu or Libyans. All right. Now I'm being specific in how I am describing this. So I'm not choosing my words, arbitrarily. I'm saying what I'm saying specifically for a reason. These figures are labeled the Chimehu because the text dictates so. Keep in mind what I said before. The text is a fixed entity. It's a fixed thing. It's the same text, same story in every single tomb. So remember, the Chimehu are always last. So these figures right here are the last set. Therefore, they're labeled Chimehu. Keep on going. As I go across, this is the first 2 figures of the set that's labeled Nehisiu. Keep on going. Now that's 3. 1, 2, 3. Keep on going. There's 4. Now we got the complete set. So here's all 4 figures that are labeled Nehisiu. And they're always the 3rd set. The Chimehu being always the 4th or last. This is the 3rd. So you can see the glyphs in between them that spell out the word Nehisiu. Even though it's a little damaged, but those of you who can read the glyphs, you would be able to make that out if I blow it up and everything like that. Keep on going. Now we got the first figure of the previous set. 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. So now we got all 4 figures of the previous set. 1, 2, 3, 4. These 4 figures are labeled Amu because of the text. The Amu are always second in position. Always the second group. They're the Amu. So these figures are labeled Amu. So let's keep on going. Now we got 1 of the previous group, of the first group. And who did I say the first group is always labeled as? What's the first group always? The first group are always the Remech, a.k.a. the Egyptians, according to the text. They're always the Egyptians. It's always first. So that's the first figure, second, and now the picture cuts off. But so you only see 2 of these 4. The other 2 are actually cut out of the picture. This picture is cropped. That's the best shot that you can get in such a small space for the photographer. Okay. But as you saw in the other picture, this picture here, so we just saw the 2 right here, but as you can see, there are 4. We already walked through the tomb and saw 4. So these first set are appropriately labeled according to the text, the Remech. You see the word Remech in between them, which is the word for the Egyptians. All right. So now let's pause for a second and let that sink in. Let all of that sink in. So I'm finished sharing the picture. So we walked through these walls in the 5th hour of the Book of Gates. So let that marinate for a second. Now, why the controversy? I'll tell you. The controversy is because of going back to the page that I shared out of Dr. Shekanta Diop's book. This particular tomb, now mind you, with what I said before, the Book of Gates is located in many tombs. Horemheb, Rameses I, Seti I, Rameses II, Merneptah, the Osirian, Seti II, so on and so forth. I went over that. In all of the instances, the text is always the same. It is what it is. The order in which the 16 figures, when it comes to that portion of the text, it's always in the same order. When they're illustrated, in terms of being carved and painted, they always reflect the traditional and historical way in which these 4 groups are visually represented and depicted. So the ancient Egyptians have a certain stereotypical look. The Amu have a certain stereotypical look. The Nehisiu have a stereotypical look. And the Chemehu have a stereotypical look. And there's certain elements in the respective cultures that they chose to highlight when they created these stereotypical looks. Okay? So, for instance, I'm going to go here to the drawing just to illustrate what I'm speaking of. In the tomb of Merneptah, from which these figures are redrawn from, the ancient Egyptians have a stereotypical look. All right. The Amu have a stereotypical look, and the elements that are of highlight is the headband that's tied a certain way, and then the sideburns coming into a pointy beard. That's the typical, or the kind of elements of the stereotype that they chose to represent the Amu. The Nehisiu, aka Nubians, the stereotypical elements that was pulled from is the tightly curled hair here, an earring that's not in this particular image, but an earring is very much a typical feature that the Egyptians used to represent the Nehisiu. Then you have obviously the so let me go back. The Egyptians are typically represented in a variation of the color red, the share in the language. All right. Now we would say brownish red today, and that would be the stereotypical coloring. The Amu would have more of a tan flesh tone coloring. The Nehisiu would be represented in a dark to black color in terms of flesh tones chosen. And then the Chemehu here are in a tan, but on a kind of on a lighter side. But what's stereotypical about the Chimehu is their side lock and curl that comes into like a curl, the letter J. And then they also have sideburns and a pointy beard. Okay, so that's stereotypical. But what I want you to notice is that, and I'm still using this drawing. Now, these four and these stereotypes that I just described is found in every single tomb that illustrates this portion of the book of Gates. So it's consistent. There's nothing different in all the other tombs. So the reason why Ramses III tomb is the heart of controversy is because this is the only tomb out of the entire 3,000 years existence of ancient Egypt. This is the only tomb where the text is what it is. It's the same text. It's the same labels representing the four figures, but the figures themselves have an issue that's not consistent with all the other tombs. Okay, so it's not the text or the labeling, it's the actual figures that are within the tomb of Ramses III that has created this controversy. The figures. All right. So now, what I want you to notice is that the Nehisiu figures, set of 4, and the Remech figures that are set of 4, they are identical. They are identical. And so what people have done is that they use this unique tomb in this unique circumstance, and they say that the ancient Egyptians see themselves as blacks or black type that we read in Diop's book here. You see this here? The ancient Egyptians seen by himself black type. Now, just on its own, without even diving any deeper, without even going through anything that I said previously, just knowing that this tomb is the only place that this has happened in comparison and relative to all the other tombs where it does not happen, for anyone to use this, which is a unique situation, and try to make it the normal or the traditional situation, would be to do so in error, grave error. Okay, that would be unfair even to the artistic world of the ancient Egyptians. So I'm going to give you for instance. Let's say there's an Egyptian word. Let's say the Egyptian word, let's pick a word. Let's say the Egyptian word Hotep. Everybody knows the word Hotep. Let's say the Egyptian word Hotep is spelled with the offering mat glyph, and then the raised bread loaf glyph representing the T, and then the matted seat or matted stool glyph, which is like a square to rectangle shape that represents the letter P. So let's say the word is spelled like that everywhere, all throughout Egypt for thousands of years, for the 3,000 years. But then a scholar finds one instance where Hotep is spelled with, instead of the offering mat as the first glyph, let's say it had the glyph for the word Ankh, that key looking glyph that everybody should be familiar with. Let's say it started with that glyph, and then that scholar says the ancient Egyptians saw Hotep as the giver of life because the Ankh glyph is there. That's how they saw it. That would be completely done in error and disingenuous to do that, because you're taking an anomaly and you're making it the norm without even discussing the norm. And so that's what happened in this particular text, Civilization of Barbarism, where you see here, where this claim is made. They've taken an anomaly situation, an abnormal situation, and made it normal, made it appear as if it's normal. So this is the beginning of the controversy. Okay? And so so these two are identical. And that's what's going on. But what people don't talk about, now there are people who don't even know that there are two sets, which means 8 in total. There's 8 figures that look alike in this tomb. That's why me going through this will put that to an end. Everyone from this point forward should now know that there are indeed 8 figures that look identical. Okay? So that's these two sets. The first set being labeled Remech, which stands for the ancient Egyptians, and the third set that's identical to that is labeled Nehisiu, which which stands for the Nubians. People translate as Nubians. So it's from here that people are saying the Egyptians saw and the Egyptians saw themselves and the Nubians are alike. Some people go as far as saying they're the same. The Egyptians and the Nubians are the same people. This is where you're getting a lot of that from. But what people don't talk about is another abnormal situation in the tomb with these figures. Notice that I said the stereotypical feature of the Chamehu, aka the Libyans, which is always the last set in the text. The typical feature is the side lock with the curled side lock. But notice down here, it's not, the figure doesn't match the label. It's over here. So another abnormal situation is that these two figures have been switched. Because remember I said what's typical about the Amu and everywhere else is the headband tied a certain way, sideburns coming into a pointed beard. That's what you have here. Headband, tied back, sideburns, and pointed beard. So these two figures have been swapped in this tomb. And then these two figures have been made identical in this tomb. So those are two very distinct anomalies or abnormal situations. Now, scholars are aware of this, and they refer to it, justifiably so, they refer to this as an anomaly. Now, they don't go as far as calling it a mistake. They're careful not to use that language, but you will see scholars refer to this as an anomaly. But nobody discusses it within the controversy that this has caused. So again, this is another reason why I'm doing this video, to point these things out. Now, so now we can go backwards to the original question. As I pointed out, this statement here is disingenuous to the facts on the ground without also discussing the fact that this is an abnormal situation. So the way this is worded and the way that people have been utilizing this quote from Dr. Diop in The Civilization of Barbarism is as if this is the law and this is the rule, when it is absolutely the opposite. So now let's go back in the tomb. Well, before we go back in the tomb, I want to show you. So I showed you this reproduction by Lepsius. Okay, because it's clear and it is faithfully drawn to how these figures looked in the tomb. Okay. Now, what's stereotypical about the Nubians, as I said, you see the hair, you see the I guess a shawl, the shoulder covering. You see the circles in the shoulder covering. These are identical. Okay. The figures are identical. Now, these figures, these two identical figures, are the figures of what the ancient Egyptians represented as Nubians, the Nehisiu. And these are identical. But again, the stereotypical features is the hair. You got the earring, which is a looped earring, not just any old earring, but a loop. You have the shoulder shawl or covering with these circles in it, and you got the little star pattern. You have a sash. You have a panther-like apron here. You have a sash hanging, and then you have these tassels. I'm just gonna call them tassels for lack of a better word. 3 tassels hanging down. Okay, alternating 3 tassels hanging down. So over here you see the similar thing. The hair is a little longer. That's covering the ear, so you don't know if there's an earring there, but it's typically an earring as well. You have the sash. You have the tassels hanging here. You have the dark skin here, and so on. Okay, so just remember all of that. Now, what I want to show you to reinforce that this figure, or these 2 figures here, which will be 8 in the tomb, that we count as 8, is 8 of these. So these 8 figures, to reinforce the fact that they are figures that are representative of Nehisi, aka Nubians, and not Egyptians. The Egyptians never depicted themselves in this particular way, with the exception of this abnormal situation in Ramses III that we're looking at, only because of the label. The label is true to the text, but the figure is not true to the Egyptians' tradition. Okay? Now, I want to show you this particular figure to reinforce that it is definitely a figure representative of the Nehisiu. So let me find this figure real quick. And I'm going to show these side by side from within the tomb. And that's what we have here. So here is a picture of that corner. And you see the first figure of the next set, which text-wise would be the Amu. But as I pointed out, the figure is the figure stereotypical of the Libyans, even though the text says the Amu, as it's supposed to. So here are 3 of, and I scooted over. It's actually 4. You see 4 in this picture, but I scooted over just so you could see. The text labels it the Remech, but the figures are the figures that are the Nehisiu, Nubians. And to reinforce that, look at this figure on my right, on your right. This is the exact same figure. Notice the hair. He's just facing the opposite direction. But notice the hair. And I can't bring that cursor over. Let me just see if I can get this. Give me 1 second here. Okay, there we go. Got my cursor, so, my arrow. So we have the hair here. You see the hair right here. You see the looped earring on all these figures. You have the shoulder covering. I said a shawl. You see the circles on the shoulder covering? You see the little loop right here, loop. The circles, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 4 circles on here. You see the circles here. You see the loop. You see the dark skin, black skin, flesh tone pigment to use to paint it. Black skin here. You see the printed front that's here, that's separated from the rest of it, coming out here. Same thing. These are the same figures. But over here, no one dares to ever say that this represents an Egyptian. Ever. Not even within the controversy that has been stirred up. No one would ever say that this is an ancient Egyptian. And the reason why is because the figure is not the figure of an ancient Egyptian. It's the figure of a Nubian, Nahisi, aka Nubian. But for some reason, when it's within this tomb, in an abnormal way, people have used this abnormality or anomaly and made it the norm. Okay? But they don't dare do it with this because this is clearly a prisoner. You see his arms in the air and you see the rope tied around his neck. Arms in the air, rope tied around the neck. But it's the same figure. It's the same figure as these. Same thing. Okay, so now, lastly, I wanna discuss what are the possibilities. Why do scholars refer to this as an anomaly, and what are the hypotheses that are out there for the reason why? Okay, because that's not discussed pretty much at all either. So I'm gonna go into that. This is my last to wrap things up. So let's go back. Remember what I said. Let's go back to, if I can get back down to the text itself. So remember what I said about the text itself in this particular portion, the actual Egyptian text and the context of the text. Remember when I said that the Remech are always first, the Amu are always second, the Nahisi are always third, and the Chemehu are always last. That's a fixed thing, just like the cardinal points. North is north, east is east always, west is always west, and so on and so forth, right? Because these are fixed cardinal points. I told you earlier that these groupings represent the cardinal points around which the Remech exists, where they live. All right. Now, I do want to show you another popular picture that people are familiar with coming from the tomb of Seti I. And this is also done, and I believe my screen has, my screen is frozen on me. Both of you all can still hear me. And if Emiket, if you are still there, just let me know I can still be heard.
2. You could be on.
Okay. Okay. My screen has frozen. So if you don't mind, if you can kindly just take over and stall a little bit, because I know there are people watching. Maybe, let everyone out. We appreciate them coming through and stuff like that. But I'm going to be right back and I'm going to finish up. But I think my screen has frozen for whatever reason. And I'm going to leave and come right back.
Okay, no problem. So while Wujao is getting his things fixed, I am just going to just answer. There's actually 2 questions that I saw that I think is just or 2, not really questions, but comments or notes that I think is kind of important to note. One was that the pictures are not entirely the same, and we're not, because these pictures are not being printed like we print pictures. So you don't expect, it's not pictures, it's images we're talking about. So these images are being carved by the scribes, specifically the Sesh Keduit. So you don't expect that that a person is going to carve exactly the same image, like for each 4, they're going to be exactly the same. So figures. So the figures are not going to be exactly the same because these are being carved by humans. So if I asked you to draw on a piece of paper, some figures, and you have to draw the same figure maybe 4 times. You're not going to do it exactly the same each time. They're going to look similar, but they're not going to be exactly the same. So we don't want to be very anal and say that they're not exactly the same. The point is that there are 4 figures that are supposed to be similar, and then and each 4 figures of the 16 total figures are supposed to be similar. So you have those of the Ramesh, you have those of the Nehisi, you have those of the Libyans, and so forth. So you don't want to be extra like they're not exactly the same. We know what is going on, they're similar. And then I think there was something else, was it from Shesmu, say that so we could conclude that the scribes were not perfectionists, or perfect in that sense. Well, the scribes are, scribes aim to be perfect, and their main focus was to be aesthetically pleasing. Those figures in the text has to be aesthetically pleasing as possible. But when you do read text, you also do know that some mistakes can be found even just in the text and not just the figures and so forth. So those are always those are rare, but they're always there. So obviously we're dealing with human beings. Just like when you write stuff yourself, you're going to misspell some things, and they're going to go through, even on publications and things of that nature. So those are always there. So yeah, so you don't want to be surprised if a mistake is pointed out, because we do know that mistakes were there as well. And I do not know if there's anything else I can go over, because I think most of the questions were actually directed to, or there are things that Wujao was talking about that he'll be the best person to answer them. Yeah, that is true. I think Wujao is back, so I don't know if you're saying something right now. Usually when you come back,
Peace.
I
Can you
don't
hear
hear
me?
you.
Peace. I'm back.
So I'll just mute for a second.
All right. So hopefully I can be heard by the chat. Just very quickly, anyone in the chat, can you just confirm that you can hear me, and then I'll continue and I'll just wrap things up. So I just need a service from anyone in the chat. If you can just let me know that I can be heard. Okay, you can hear me. All right, so I'm going to continue, and I'll be wrapping things up. So let me get my cursor back over to my slide. So where was I? So keep in mind, I've been saying the same thing. Remember, the text is the text. The order in which the 16 figures are labeled in the text and they come up and it's being spoke about is a consistent fixed order. The Ramesh are always first, which are the ancient Egyptians. The Amu are always second, which are the Asians. The Nehisiu are always third. They are the Nubians. People refer to as the Nubians. And last, or the fourth and last, are always the Chemehu, which are the Libyans. Okay? That is always consistent. And it follows that same consistency in every single tomb where this text is found, which I gave you all, and you all can come back to this video, and I gave you all of the tombs where you can find this. It's only in the tomb of Rameses III where the consistency is now inconsistent. There's an inconsistent situation. And scholars refer to it as an anomaly or abnormal situation. And so remember what I said, that within the controversy, what kind of instigated it is because this abnormal situation was changed or made to appear to be the norm, and it's absolutely not. Okay, so what I wanted to do was to show another popular drawing of the same text but illustrated in a different tomb. So now I'm gonna show the drawing from the tomb of Seti the First, as it is, and that's here. And a lot of people are familiar with this particular drawing. So as you can see in the beginning of the text, you have the deity Heru here. As I said, he existed in the tomb of Ramses III, but that part was damaged, so you don't see Heru standing there anymore. And in front of him are always the same order. So you have the Remech, and you can see the same glyphs that are spelling the name or the label Remech. But these figures here are representative of the traditional way that the ancient Egyptians depicted themselves everywhere. Okay? So the tomb of Seti I never triggered any controversy because this is the norm. Okay? So the Remech are listed first as the text dictates it should be, and then the figures are typical of what the Remech depicted themselves as. Okay, the next group is what? If you all been paying attention, you all should be able to tell me. The next group are always the Amu. And let me get the complete picture where I don't have to piece it one by one. Let me find my complete picture. Here we go. Here it is here. So, and I have this big arrow. Let me remove that out the way. So, again, you have Heru. The first set is labeled. Now I'm using my words on purpose. The first set is rightfully labeled Remech. The second set is rightfully labeled Amu. The third set is rightfully labeled Nehisiu. And by labeled I mean the glyphs that are in between. And the last set is rightfully labeled Chemehu. But now in this tomb of Seti I, as well as all the other tombs, the figures that represent each category are the normal, typical figures that one would expect. So these figures look to the eyes like the typical Egyptians. These next set of figures look to the eyes of the typical Amu, what they pulled out to stereotypically represent them in artwork. You have the pointed beard, sideburns, headband. The third set is standard and the typical depiction of the Nehisiu or Nubians, the dark to black skin, flesh tone, the tassels that are hanging off, the short hair that's tightly curled, like twisted on a stick, etc. The last set is properly labeled Chemehu, but these typically fit what the Egyptians have always done when they depict the Chemehu. They have some of them, the depictions elsewhere would have the feather, some of them don't, but you always see this letter J shaped curled side lock with the sideburns and pointed beard. So these are the typical depictions of each of these four groups, and this exists in all of the tombs except for the tomb of Ramses III, which is what we are discussing. So now what I want you to take note of, and this is how I'm going to wrap this up, because I'm explaining the possibility of how this became an anomaly in the first place. All right. One, you have to understand the history of the tomb of Ramses III, how it was built. It was built, and the way it was built, they started at the entrance and they started to build inward and down, going into the ground. And they came up upon a problem. It was actually going towards another person's tomb. So they had to stop construction of the tomb, move it to the side, to the right-hand side a bit, and then continue. So within the tomb, there's a break. There's a instead of it being straight, it's supposed to be straight all the way through and through. But at a certain point in the tomb, they had to go to the right. So they had to build a corridor to the right of them and then make another 90-degree angle and then continue straight. So that's one thing. Then the tomb itself originally wasn't for Ramses the third. He was supposed to be buried, I believe, in what's called KV number 2 or 3. Somebody can, correct me on that. I'm just going from memory at the moment in terms of where he was originally to be buried. But nevertheless, this was his tomb, ended up being his tomb. So those are two factors there. Now, in terms of the possibility or a possibility of how this anomaly has occurred, remember the stereotypical looks of these 4 categories of people, and the order that's important, and the order. So I'm gonna go back to the drawing of Ramses III tomb here. So now, here's my question, and I'm not going to wait for an answer, so I'm asking a rhetorical question, and I'm going to answer my own question. But you should ask yourself, or recite to yourself, what's the order, the consistent order of these figures? Again, it's the Egyptians, then the Amu, or the Remech, then the Amu, then the Nehisiu, then the Chimehu. Okay? That's the fixed order. So, if you were looking at the Nehisiu within any other tomb, so follow me on this. If you're in the tomb of Seti the First, let's go back to Seti first, real quick. I'm just going to show the drawing again. So here we are in the tomb of Seti I. If you're looking at the Nehisiu in terms of the figures, okay, you're looking at these figures here. Who comes after the Nehisiu? What's consistently never broken, always true to tradition? Who comes after the Nehisiu? Remember, Nehisiu is always third. So the group after them are always the Chimehu. Always. So remember how they look. The stereotypical look is the curled side lock, the curled braided side lock with the sideburns and the beard. And guess what? In the tomb of Ramses III, visually now, forget the labels for a moment. We're gonna dispense with the labels. So ignore the labels. The labels, we already understand that is true to the text. That never changes. But now look at the figures. This figure is a figure of a Nehisiu. Again, who comes after the Nehisiu? The Chimehu. And look at the figure. It's the figure of the braided side lock with the curl. So the figure after the Nehisiu is the correct figure. And within the tomb, you'll see where, and I'm going to go back to the picture of the tomb. Where's a good picture here? You'll see that if we were going strictly by the figures and we were ignore the label, we would assume that these are the Nubians. Because the figures are indeed and in fact Nubian figures. And who, figure-wise, who comes after the Nubians? The Chimehu. So these figures are correct. The first 2 figures in their sequence, figure-wise now, they're correct in the correct order. But we would have to ignore the text in order to accept this. You understand? So now, Follow me on this. Again, this is something that is not discussed, but I'm discussing it with you all. So now, if you understand what I just said, that the Nubian figure is always followed by the Chemehu figure, then these two will make sense to you now, or should make sense to you now. So the hypothesis of what occurred within the tomb is that the way in which this tomb, I'm going to go back to the picture of the tomb. I'm trying to find, where's my wide shot? My wide shot is down here. So within this tomb, the way it was built, and the way and the procedure, like the method and the steps in which this tomb was actually completed out, that these first two sets of figures by alone themselves were done correctly in terms of the relationship to each other. The Chemehu looking figure always comes after the Nubian or the Nehisiu looking figure. But when you come to the text, there was some kind of realization that the text here is not talking about the Nehisiu over here or the Chemehu right here, that it doesn't pick up until right here where it talks about the Nehisiu. So the Nehisiu are rightfully carved here. And once you do that, the only set that's missing out of these would be the Asians now in terms of their look. So they have to draw the Asian looking figures last, even though it's labeled as the second over here, Amu. So the Asian looking figures is last. So let's go back to the drawing so we can be clear on that. So here's a drawing. So the Asian figure would have been missed had they redrawn the Chemehu looking figure. So they would have ended up with these two being identical and these two being identical. So this figure would have been over here, but there was a decision that was likely, because we'll never know, because that happened 1,000 years ago and nobody's alive to tell us. But that's why I say this is a hypothesis in terms of a suggestion of what could have possibly taken place. We will never know for sure. As far as what took place to create the anomaly. But this is the running hypothesis, is that to get the four different differentiated looks in, they had to put the Asian looking figure last and not duplicate the Chemehu looking figure as they did with the Nehisi figure. Okay? And that's a good probability of how it took place because of how these tombs are designed and how they're done, how they take turns and take shifts, and then the way this particular tomb being the longest, pretty much in Egypt, and how it was made and developed. You have tombs, and I'm sure if you don't know, then it may be a surprise to you, but you have a few tombs in ancient Egypt that are not completed. That were never completed, but yet it was still sealed up, where you only see the outlying drawing of figures that wasn't carved yet. You see the red paint, that's the outline paint. You see the chalk lines. You even see the grids still there in some tombs. And maybe another show, I'll show some of those. So these are all possibilities and probabilities of what occurred within this particular tomb. So those are the possible things, and like I said, to be definitive, we will not know. But what we do know definitively is that these two figures here that are at the heart of the controversy are identical within the tomb, and they're 8 in number, and that these figures everywhere else have always depicted the Nubians only. The Nubians only. And as I showed you here, here's the typical Nubian, which is indeed this figure right here. These figures right here. And there are 8 of these in the tomb. These are the things we know for a fact and know for sure. So what people have done, they've utilized this inconsistent anomaly, aka abnormal situation, and have made it appear to be the normal, to argue and to push an anachronistic idea about the blackness of the ancient Egyptians. So to support the anachronistic argument about the race of the ancient Egyptians, people have chosen to use an abnormal anomaly situation within the tomb of Rameses III in order to advance that anachronistic argument. And it's indeed anachronistic because people are attempting to apply modern social constructs of race backwards in time on ancient peoples that had no such concept in their minds or in their psyche at all. And so hopefully this will clear up at least the orientation within the tomb. Hopefully this will clear up the fact that people didn't believe that there are 2 sets of 4 figures that are identical, making it 8 in total, and that indeed that one set is labeled ancient Egyptians or Remech, and the other set that are identical are actually labeled Nehisiu, aka Nubians. So you have the Egyptians labeled and the Nubians labeled, labels on 8 figures that look alike. 2 sets of 4. 2 times 4 is 8. So for those who never believed that or didn't believe it, now you have no choice but to accept it because I have shown it to you. So hopefully those 2 things have been satisfied and taken care of. Okay? And now obviously hopefully people will understand that the Book of Gates is a fixed text. It has a fixed order in the text talking about these 4 groups, and it's a beautiful long text. I only read that very, very small portion of it, and that the ancient Egyptians. Now elsewhere in the tomb, let me see if I can see this in the picture. If you look within this tomb, if you look everywhere else, every single place, this tomb is huge. And I don't know if I have, let me see if I have the, I don't have the drawing of the entire tomb, the layout. But if you look at every other figure in this tomb, even in this tomb, when it comes to depicting the ancient Egyptians, they're always depicted in the typical, stereotypical ancient Egyptian look. Let me show you the look I'm talking about. You can't see them that good, but this particular look, coming from the drawing, the stereotypical look here, everywhere else in the tomb, everywhere else. So again, that also speaks against the claim that this is how the Egyptians saw themselves. Okay, so it would be a grave error to continue to do that, to take an abnormal situation and to make and act like this is actually normal, as if the Egyptians saw themselves this way, normal, as a normal thing, when it's not. So again, that pretty much concludes what I had to share. I'm not gonna, basically continue to beat a dead horse. Just wanted to show elsewhere in the tomb, yeah, I don't have any other pictures from the tomb a part of these particular slides, but I do have pictures of the entire tomb, and maybe I'll share that another time when I'm not talking about this particular issue. But I was going to show how everywhere else the ancient Egyptians are depicted in the very stereotypical fashion, which lends credit to the explanation of how this became an anomaly. All right. So hopefully that is clarified, and hopefully me doing it this way is a giving better clarification on at least the orientation of the tomb and things like that. So I don't want to make this video long at all. So I appreciate everyone tuning in. And normally I would, go straight to the chat and engage the chat, but that's definitely going to make the video long, knowing me being MC Iron Lung and long-winded. So I want to close this out, but I don't want you all to think that if you had questions or any comments about it, that I don't wish to address it. I'd rather do that in a separate video. Okay, so I'm going to end this video, and today's still early-ish in the early evening. So I may go live again later on as a discussion part of this. Okay, but I want to end this here, and I appreciate everyone to know that I appreciate you hanging out and tuning in. But if you have questions, they're welcome, but I don't want you to forget them. Write them down. Type it out, write them down, type it in your phone just so you can remember it, because when I go live again, you can bring them up. All right. So with that, I'm going to close out with the beautiful words of Dr. John Henry Clarke addressing the issue of black and blackness. All right. So peace until later on. Peace.
And this is the irony of it all, and this is the trap. The Europeans began to manipulate history when they rose and began to expand into the broader world in the 15th and the 16th century because they had to justify the slave trade, and they had to justify the colonial system that followed. And modern racism has its incubation in that period. You cannot enslave a man and say he's a human being, but he has humanity. Black people have never written any definitions of race, any definitions of what a people. They have never said that these people with these kind of traits belong here. Because modern racism had its development in the pseudo-scientific development of intellectual Europe after the 15th century. And they began to say that certain kind of people belong to certain kind of race, and they created the concept of race and racism itself.
You're saying, in essence, that there's no such thing as a race.
Oh, I maintain that race is the phoniest issue ever invented by the mind of man. European invented, developed the concept of race. There's really no such thing as a race because nature created no races. Race is a man-made thing.
Could we say that being called black was a political term?
It's a political term, and a term which indicates our self-awareness at this juncture in history, and I think we really need it. We need to really bathe in blackness for a while, but I wish we'd get the bath over with and go on to something a little more important. We need to really bathe in blackness for a while, but I wish we'd get the bath over with and go on to something a little more important. Black in itself is not an ethnic term. Black tells you how you look, but it don't tell you who you are. We are essentially an African people. Wherever we live on this earth, we're essentially an African people. And we relate to the millions of African people throughout the world, including the uncounted millions of Africans in Asia. The word Afro-American or African-American would probably be more appropriate and more honest and more in keeping with what we actually are. Because all of us are not positively, physically, real jet black. And so the argument now sometimes is between the supernationalists and the mild nationalists and blacker than thou. When blackness is a state of mind, a state of attitude, a state of approach to things that can exist in almost any of us, including from the blonde black person to the jet black. And the jet black can be traitors, and they can be patriarchs. They can be a whole lot of it. See, we've been everything in history from saint to buffoon. We are complete people, and we need to start looking at ourselves as a complete people. And I think that once we convinced ourselves that we're black and beautiful, we'll stop saying it and just go ahead and be black and beautiful and release a whole lot of energy for more important things.
Could we say that being called black was a political term?
It's a political term, and a term which indicates our self-awareness at this juncture in history, and I think we really need it. We need to really bathe in blackness for a while, but I wish we'd get the bath over with and go on to something a little more important.